There is what I believe to be some relatively breaking news with Gobekli Tepe, as far as you can have breaking news with a 12,000-year-old establishment, if you will. But it is difficult to tell sometimes with archaeological news because a lot of this stuff gets regurgitated through different media, and you don't exactly know when things happened, when they were breaking, when they are not breaking, if you were just getting a regurgitated story. But this is new to me, and I thought I would pass it on to you. And then there's something at the end of this that I want to talk about that I think is interesting. And I there's a very, very specific story from archaeology that I think would help really diagnose what is going on with Gobekli Tepe. But getting into this, an article titled Excavations at Gobekli Tepe Continue to Yield Findings, subtitled Researchers Found Living Quarters of an Ancient Civilization, which disproved earlier theories that the site served solely as a ceremonial pilgrimage destination by the Jerusalem Post staff. Excavations at Gobekli Tepe continue to yield findings. Researchers found living quarters of an ancient civilization which disproved earlier theories that the site served solely as a ceremonial pilgrimage destination. It never made much sense to me that this was basically a vacation spot for hunter gatherers. Why put that much effort into something that is going to be a McDonald's along the way, a quick trip along the way as you migrate from place to place? It just didn't make sense to me. Gobekli Tepe, those are tornado sirens. Uh-oh. Gobekli Tepe, a Neolithic archaeological site situated in the Germus Mountains of southeastern Anatolia, close to the border of Syria, revolutionized our understanding of prehistory and the origins of civilization, particularly regarding ancient humans and their societal complexities. The oldest parts of Gobekli Tepe date back to around 10,000 BCE, with its construction occurring up to 15,000 years ago. I know that this is going to be, if you probably, this is information that you already know. I just think it's worth going back over as we lead into the discussion I want to have after this. The enormous T-shaped pillars at Gobekli Tepe, some reaching heights of 5.5 meters, are the oldest examples of monumental architecture discovered to date. These pillars were carved from flint at a time when metal tools were not yet used, demonstrating architectural skills. I think the human usage of metal goes back way further than we know. Why? Well, because of this. We have the reason we date the use of metal where we date it is because of where metal is found, and you don't get, just like with stones, you don't get to date metal equipment. So you assume that it is from the civilization with whom it is found. But here's what I will caution: metal would have been extremely valuable. Extremely valuable. So even if you had a tool that was outdated, for example, you had a screwdriver in the age of power drills, the metal itself was so valuable that you would not have let it be. You would have taken the screwdriver and melted it down and done whatever you could to provide for the next power drill. There's going to be that metal, and these are obviously terrible examples, but you get what I'm saying. That metal was so valuable, it would not have been left behind. So many assets and resources would have gotten put into metal, developing and crafting and shaping, etc., that it would not have been thrown away. And it would have been exceedingly rare as well. So if it had gotten lost, it's very unlikely that we're going to find it. So far, and when we do find it, we attribute it to a later civilization. So far, only about 10% of the Gobekli Tepe site was excavated, and it is likely to take around 150 years to excavate the full site. Absolute malarkey. Archaeologists estimate that there are still 15 more enclosures buried underground, one of which could be up to 15,000 years old, built around 13,000 BCE. As excavations continue, researchers hope to unravel more mysteries about this ancient site, according to InfoBay. Here's the thing: all you have to do, one Joe Rogan episode where you put out a call to all volunteers, all of these guys, and it will be guys, will understand that they are going to be non paid interns for 2 months. They're going to go through 2 weeks of training how to not ruin things, and this site will be excavated in a weekend. Gobekli Tepe could be the first known temple in the world, proposed to be a religious center in the Neolithic, making it at least 16,000 years older than Stonehenge. The discovery challenges the idea that agriculture was the first step towards civilization, as it appears to have been a ceremonial center rather than a simple agricultural settlement. The discovery led to a change in how archaeologists approach prehistory and called into question accepted theories about the development of early civilization and the adoption of agriculture and animal husbandry. At Gobekli Tepe, communities of hunter-gatherers gathered to perform rituals periodically dating from an area of 200 kilometers to celebrate rituals related to the animals represented on the pillars. That is completely um, hypothetical, I think. I don't know what they have to suggest that is absolutely the truth. The complex would have been constructed by groups of hunter gatherers who periodically gathered to celebrate rituals related to animals represented on the pillars of the site, stated Klaus Schmidt, the late archaeologist who led excavations until his death in 2014. Sculptures, Sculptures, both zoomorphic and anthropomorphic, were found at Gobekli Tepe, suggesting that religion and spirituality may have been key factors in the formation of the complex societies. The motifs and adornments on the pillars resemble representations of the mythological story, which could serve as proof that Gobekli Tepe was a center of worship. Now, the interesting thing about articles like this is they start with very big claims. Researchers found living quarters of an ancient civilization, which disproved earlier theories that the site served solely as a ceremonial pilgrimage destination. And then they don't substantiate it. Now, this was one of many different headlines that I had seen about this crawl across my Google feed. All of them were relatively empty like this. I am going to accept that what has happened here is that something like living quarters were actually found, and then something like AI was used to generate an article about Gobekli Tepe. But I did want to set the stage for what Gobekli Tepe is, and I think there are some interesting things to talk about with this, assuming that the living quarters were actually found, and this is not a clickbait title that keeps coming up in my feed. Here's something I want to talk about. It never made much sense to me that Gobekli Tepe would have been just a visitation site, that it would have been like a church along the road, because that was a lot, an awful lot of resources to be poured into something, especially if these are people without civilization, if these are people without an actual resting place. It wouldn't make any sense. There is, from history, an archaeological case and point. Now, I couldn't find an actual resource for this, an actual source for this story. So I had to rely on AI. But this is how it went. In the late 1990s, scientists hypothesized that a transitional fossil between fish and amphibians would be found in around the 375 million year old sediment in the Canadian Arctic. In 2004, they found Tiktaalik, a creature with both fish and proto-limb features, a perfect evolutionary intermediate. What does this mean, and why do I want to talk about this in correlation with Gobekli Tepe? Well, basically what this means is there were a bunch of scientists sitting around and they said, this whole evolution thing, if there was this movement from sea creature to land creature, there would have been an intermediary animal. An animal that had limbs so it could go around on land, but it also had fins. It also had gills so that it could live underwater. That would have been a very strange thing to take place. Well, if we model back millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, 375 million years ago, where would the perfect place for that animal to have emerged been? And they settled on the Canadian Arctic. Whatever the actual living conditions were in what is now the Canadian Arctic at that time would have been, they proposed, the perfect breeding grounds for an animal with proto-limbs and gills. And then they found it. If the Younger Dryas really was as confounding a time period on Earth as they say, and I believe it was. I believe it was. Then maybe instead of looking for cities, for ancient cities, where we think we would find them today, we think back 15,000 years when they believe the construction on Gobekli Tepe may have begun. Think back that far. What did the Earth look like then? Is that where cities would have been? So one thing that I often wonder, and I know that it's difficult because we don't necessarily, as far as I understand, have the tools to do this, to really do this, to make a real go at it, is the post-Younger Dryas was a time of flood, right? Maybe I'm misunderstanding that. But there was a great flooding that happened as global warming melted the massive ice sheets. Well, we know that people love to live along the water. It makes things so much easier. You have fresh water, you have running water, you have water to bathe in, you have water to drink from, you have water to cook from, you have water to hunt in. Okay, great. You have water that animals love to drink from, and you can hunt them there too. All of these things make being by the water very beneficiary. Unless there's a great big flood that takes out massive swaths of what was earth and makes it water. Is it possible that, like the myth of Atlantis, there is some great city that lies under what is today the water? Now, that would be extremely difficult to prove because things don't last that long underwater, for one. For two, the power of the water that washed away the city would have taken stuff forever away, would have just decimated whatever could have been left behind, or would have been there to be washed over. And number three, it is unlikely. Now, I made the case for metalworking being older than we think earlier. I don't know if it would have been 15,000 years ago old. I think probably we would have found evidence for it earlier than we have it, had somebody would have lost something at some point in time, is what I mean, before the time period that we have it. There would have been enough metal worked that something would have been left over from an earlier time. But I do think that it makes great sense that had there been earlier civilizations, maybe we would not have the access to them because they are currently underwater. This has also always interested me about Egypt. I am of the impression that Egypt is much older than we think, even if I'm willing to grant you the pyramids are the exact age that they say the pyramids are. The Sphinx is the exact age that they say the Sphinx is. I'm willing to accept that. If you want to make that argument, I can accept that and still believe that Egypt is much older than what we are being told. Why? Well, you've got a corner store, the Five and Dime on the corner. We'll call it Joe's Five and Dime. Well, Joe wants to redo his Five and Dime. Does he build a brand new? Structure, or does he rebuild where he is because where he is all about location, location, location? How many things in Egypt were knocked down and rebuilt? There's no way you can look me in the eyes and convince me that Egypt, as we have it, Egypt, as it stands today, was a one-off, was a first try. You can't convince me that. You cannot convince me that the greatness that Egypt is, that they just accidented into that. And I'm not going to have any of these arguments that are used against Graham Hancock that to say this is racist, because it's not. Whoever built Egypt would have built previous iterations of Egypt. There's no I can't stand arguments like that. But the idea that Egypt is older than we think, in my opinion, makes it incredibly harsh conditions in Egypt, aren't there? This makes the survival of artifacts extremely difficult, and still we have so many from Egypt. Is that because everything just happened to get saved? Or is it because there was so much stuff that we are lucky and fortunate enough today to have some of it? You cannot convince me that Egypt was a first try. I think Egypt is much older than we are told. And if Egypt is much older than we are told, and Gobekli Tepe is kind of an albatross in the history books, they didn't even teach me about it when I was a kid. I knew nothing about it until the internet age, just 5 years ago or so. It was probably around 2020. I cannot believe that it was just Gobekli Tepe. And thousands of years later, Egypt sprang up, pyramids and all, with no previous history. I think that everything that we are taught because it's a best guess. That's how all of this stuff works. It's just a best guess until someone comes along and can prove that guess wrong. So anyway, guys, that is just a little bit of stuff about Gobekli Tepe I thought was interesting enough to pass on. If you like or appreciate this sort of thing, hitting the like button really does help me out. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.